that was my first understanding of fentanyl, and it was as a treatment. It was just as a pain treatment. Like it was often came in a patch form, and it was more something that I would see used in palliative care. So I first learned about it in a very medicalized context. And then I feel like there was this reintroduction maybe a year or 2 years after that, so 2015-ish. All of a sudden I felt like, man, I'm hearing about this constantly, and I feel like we're not talking about fentanyl patches for elderly ladies anymore. I think we're talking about something entirely different.
It's midday on a Friday. Myself, Brooklyn Fowler, and 2 other researchers, Carl Steffens and Graham Beyer, are arriving at VANDU, the Vancouver area network of drug users, on East Hastings Street in Vancouver. The street is busy and full of life and activity, as always. People are standing or sitting in doorways and along the sidewalks, selling things and socializing. I'm always struck by the palpable sense of community in this neighborhood. People seem to know each other and help people out. As we walk, a man hollers to me, "Your pack is open." So it is. I zip up the open pouch and say thank you. As we enter VANDU, there's a lot of energy in the space as some 24 people move around in the lobby, socializing, sitting, resting. On our first visit, we presented our project to VANDU's board in order to get their permission to work with them. While we were speaking to them, screams of "Someone's down" echoed up from the lobby downstairs, and several board members jumped up and ran downstairs. This brought to life the statistics that inspired this project. We'd heard numbers like there are an average of 25 overdoses in BC every day, and that 3 to 4 people die every day in this province of an overdose linked to fentanyl. But this experience brought those numbers to life. Several minutes later, people started returning to the room, saying that it was a serious overdose and an ambulance had to be called, but that they expected her to be all right.
Since this fentanyl crisis, the amount of deaths that have occurred are left unsaid. I do not understand how this is not a bigger crisis than it is. The amount of people that die every day is ridiculous. You don't see that anywhere else.
All of a sudden something's not right. We've used like the same dope bought from the same guy, look the same, at the same, quantity for years and years and years. And you could kind of trust your own response to that, but all of a sudden you couldn't. And all of a sudden people were losing friends and neighbors, and it was just fast. Like it felt like it was overnight. I know it wasn't, but that's the way it really felt. Because all of a sudden there was this very scary substance. We were challenging what is legal and what is illegal in Canada. That's huge. That's a tremendous thing to have on the table.
The best thing would be ending prohibition, right? Then there's at least government control of a clean substance and all that. It takes it out of the hands of criminal organizations, which are there purely for profit and don't care.
If you were to regulate these drugs, you would have regulation. If you were, and when you have that regulation, there is often a lot less misuse, and it, I think there's lots of studies that have been done that have been proven that if you do regulate drugs, that it's just beneficial for society altogether as a whole, and I think that you see a lot more countries going that way.
I think part of it is if all drugs were legal and if people were able to have regulated doses like that, come from somewhere where they don't have to go and steal and sell their bodies or whatever to support it, it would be a lot easier for people to recover and be viewed as normal members of society instead of just living on the street and being arrested, having it be a social problem instead of a criminality.
don't know what the cause is for like the stigma. I think that people look at it like, you know, these guys are just a bunch of junkies. We shouldn't look down upon people. Like, I feel like even just saying homeless people, you're putting them in a group, you know? Like, you're saying, oh, you don't have a house, you know, so this is bad for you. You're assuming that every little thing, like every homeless person does drugs, every homeless person has done something wrong to have a reason for being down there. And that's not it, you know? It's not hard to get there. I've met like lawyers to cops, like everything that, you know, had their life together, you know, and it could be as easy as losing a family member, losing your wife, you lose your house. And then next thing you know, you're in a shelter. And they're like, I never thought I would end up here. Because they're working hard. They were doing everything right, but life just happened.
People have been like dying from like drug use in the downtown east side for so long. It's been like an epidemic for so long that just now that people are starting to get scared because of fentanyl reaching like wealthier parts of like drug use, starting to like reach more like recreational users. And I think like that's changing some conversation. It's just kind of like sad that it has to be like that kind of way.
The fentanyl crisis affects every community. And if you have not been affected, then you're lucky.
Now that fentanyl has been sneaking into drugs and is getting into suburbs, and then you have more people of like wealth, power, and like more white people live in suburbs, that now people are starting to pay like more attention to it, and now people are starting to question it.
Because now it's not just about, and I use just, yeah, carefully. It's not just about homeless people with mental illness living in the downtown east side. It's not just about a street entrenched population of addicted people. Now it's different. Now it's crested into 14-year-olds in Surrey and in Burnaby, high school kids overdosing at Halloween parties. It's a different crowd now, and so it's getting a different response. And we should not have had to wait this long, but now it's going to serve the purpose of challenging people's perceptions about drug use.
I think that there is a lot of education being done where it's, hey, like your drugs could be laced with fentanyl, or you are using fentanyl, or it's just, you know, like drug use is becoming like quite scary, as like there's been tons of overdoses, and even though you think you know what you're doing, you don't, because you can't control it the same way. So that's good, but I also think that it's creating like that fear of like drug use and fentanyl is in one sense like maybe like good, because there is like a fear of using it and it is having overdoses, but at the other hand it might be isolating people who are using the drugs because of that fear. It might be like really othering and scary at the same time. And like narrative is really important to be critical of, because fentanyl has started to reach like recreational drug users in like the suburbs and these in places of wealth that is starting to get like more attention, and like a lot of like white suburbs, whereas places where people of color living, specifically indigenous people, like that have been having like drug problems for a longer time, and like fentanyl like hit them first in a lot of ways. Nothing's been done about it. And I keep bringing that up because the place I work at obviously has like a race component to it. So I'm just like maybe more aware of that. So I think that because it's reaching these other places, that people are like the suburbs and whatever, like people are using like their media sources, they're sharing it, like their friends.
I think that it's pulling in people to the conversation that would have tapped out way earlier, because, you know, as I think has been said in a horrifying number of comment threads, oh good, it's natural selection. Great, we're losing people that I don't care about. Let them die. It's horrific, but it's on every thread and it's just the worst. But people aren't so quick to say that about a 14-year-old kid who's on a soccer team, you know, and who used whatever they used at a party.
I think like that's the conversation that people are starting to have, where it's not you don't have to have a huge drug problem, and I think like that is changing like the stigma. because I don't think people look at recreational drug use as a problem the same way, where like it can be fun, it's young, it's often a lot sexier, it's like you're in a club, or like Coke associated with like sometimes like high culture of like models and actors and like that cool party life. So because like when you use like drugs in different contexts, you get like different reactions. So I think we talk about drug use in the downtown east side a lot, because that's when like drug use is negative, where if you were to say use like Coke at like a cool high class party that was like rich and you had celebrities and tons of money, it's looked at kind of glamorous. That's looked at differently than someone who's using a lot of Coke to stay warm when they're homeless. So like with the fentanyl crisis, it's like bridging like this like gap between like the everyday person versus these people who have these extreme problems.
In the following section, we get to know our narrators a bit better, including the variety of approaches to harm reduction that they take, and the roles of the government and police in frontline harm reduction. Today the atmosphere is lighter. We walk in and ask the main desk how to best go about finding people who want to speak with us about harm reduction. She turns away, steps up on a chair, and shouts through the space, "Who wants to talk to these folks about harm reduction?" So that's how. 2 men raise their hands to volunteer. To respect their privacy, I will call them by the pseudonyms Brian and Ben. Brian showed me to the back of the main floor, where they run an overdose prevention site. We then moved to the kitchen for a quiet place to record our interview. Later, Ben brings us back to the overdose prevention site while it's closed for a training seminar. Other than VANDU volunteers Ben and Brian, we interviewed Zoe, a nurse, Richard, a frontline worker with Rain City Housing, Matthew, who works with Indigenous youth, and Rachel, who provides harm reduction services through First United Church. Each has a different reason for why and how they became involved with frontline harm reduction work, but each spoke impactfully about losing friends, colleagues, clients, and family members to overdoses. They each spoke of fentanyl as a drug unlike anything they've ever seen.
I recently just started working at First United a couple months ago. I am a support worker, a shelter resource worker, and what I do is I interact with the clients and I meet them with where they're at. I give them resources, and we also have harm reduction there. With harm reduction, we have the supplies wrapped up together, and simply when people ask, we give them the supplies.
I work as a youth care counselor, so I work in an addiction center for First Nations youth ages 13 to 18. We have like different drug misuse.
I graduated from UBC with my nursing degree 3 years ago, and shortly after that found myself working in community mental health and addiction on an outreach team. It's been really wonderful work, but it has also put me in a place where I've been able to watch the fentanyl crisis as it affects my clients, and that has been really hard. They're a pretty vulnerable population any day, and then to have fentanyl at first slowly and quietly, and now faster and faster every month, and touching their lives and ultimately losing people to that has been really hard. So after a couple years, I decided that I felt like, I'm seeing it, but I'm seeing it from this really strange perspective of working closely, but ultimately not being there in the moments where my clients overdose.
Commonly cited numbers on fentanyl's effects are that it is 100 times as potent as heroin, meaning that even long-time heroin users who know their dosage are getting much stronger effects. These numbers aren't precise, but they serve as a valuable function to help us understand the nature of this crisis. Fentanyl is now found in nearly all heroin for sale on the streets, and has turned up in virtually every other illegal drug. Therefore, people with addictions to these drugs are continuing to use drugs from a supply chain that has been tainted with what amounts to a poison. Vancouver Coastal Health statistics from the first 9 months of 2017 found that 86% of overdose deaths have been linked to fentanyl. To help stem the tide of fatalities, Narcan or naloxone, a drug that reverses the effects of an opioid overdose, is available for free to anyone at most pharmacies and public health clinics. It comes in a kit with 3 vials of medicine and 3 syringes, allowing you to administer it 3 separate times or 3 times at once for severe overdoses.
I was living in the Regent Hotel for a year and a half, and every day there was somebody ODing on that floor, like that didn't live there, just going in to use. And you know, the way I learned how to use those Narcan kits was because that guy was dying on the floor. I had to, you know, I didn't have no course. I just learned how to do it that day, right? Like, and I bet you there was 35 people that we Narcaned in the time we lived there.
It wasn't until I actually happened to run into a client at Main and Hastings. I was on the other side of the street and I was helping someone move into an SRO, and I just looked across the street and there was this crowd of people gathering, but nobody seemed to be moving. And there was just something, you know, when you just have this feeling from a block away, where like something was not right. And I just stopped what I was doing and ran across the street, and there was someone down, and we started getting ready to Narcan them, and it all moved really fast and it was not very smooth, but ultimately the person survived and they stood up. And when I looked at this person, I realized they had been a client of mine the previous year, but to see them down and on the street and like quite gray, they didn't look like themselves. And also I was up by their head, so I was seeing them upside down, and it was so scary. It was so scary, and it wasn't until that moment that I thought, okay, what does it mean to be frontline? Because I thought I was doing frontline work, and then this happened. And if this is frontline, then that's not actually what I'm doing all day. So how can I be of the greatest help, and how can I actually be there for my clients?
Started it down on Abbott Street, that those places you can go and they give you dope to do, so it's monitored drugs, right? And if you can, you know, you admit, you say that you're going to go to this place 4 times a day to use there, and you won't use anywhere else. So you're going to be safe. Like with the prescription drugs, you know what you're getting, right? You know what it's going to do to you, right? You don't know what's going to do with this fentanyl and this carfentanil, and guys are loving it. They love it. Really, it's killing them, but they love doing it, eh? And that's the insanity of it, man. Right? Like, I think a lot more of those kind of places are to be opened. You know, a lot of people disagree with them, but ask anyone's parents or kid whose family member just died, they would want them for sure, right?
The Crosstown Clinic is a clinic in the downtown east side, which has hosted several important clinical trials of prescription heroin, including the Salome and Naomi studies. According to their website, these studies assess the longer-term efficacy of treatments for people with chronic heroin addiction who are not benefiting sufficiently from available treatments, such as oral methadone. Aside from being a valuable partner for this project, the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, VANDU, was formed in 1998 as a peer-run organization dedicated to improving the lives of drug users, their families, and our communities. They organize in their communities to save lives by promoting local, regional, and national harm reduction education and interventions. Insight is a safer injection site in the downtown east side, operated in partnership with Vancouver Coastal Health and the Portland Housing Society. Insight's clients can come to the site for clean needles and medical supervision while using.
not having these places open all the time. Like there shouldn't be a set time on harm reduction, or it should be open all the time. There should be more of them. Like you go to all of them right now, they're all full. Like, and there's a lineup waiting to get into them, and that's all day. Like they close at 10 o'clock. That's so they go outside and they're just shooting dope outside, right, or in the back alleys. There should be something open all the time, like an arena size, and it would be full. It would be full, guaranteed. It would be full.
Sometimes the cops would show up before the ambulance if we were calling for an overdose. And the intention is that that is a safe space. And lots of people have history and sort of current status that makes having the police close to them while they're using not safe. I think that's true for almost any person. So there was this goal that I think in most cases is achievable, to have the community police their own as much as possible. I think that even when there is tension and challenge between people, there is a shared understanding that most people have been targeted by the cops at some point, and that if there is a way to work this out without calling them, that is the better way. Not because the cops are doing a bad job most of the time, because I really think that they are doing the best they can most of the time. Most people are good and they're working with the best of intentions. But there's so much history and so much trauma that if we can find a better way to police this amongst ourselves in this moment, then let's try and do that.
We often look at like places like they're enforcers and not helping, but I think like what a lot of times like the conflict or like the issues people have with the police is that it's not the police, but it's the ways in which like police have to operate. It illuminates how they are set up, and a lot of the ways I feel like our system is like set up is it's like just kind of lagging behind in a lot of ways.
Conservative party there with Harvard was I don't know, I guess they had their agenda all along about what was, they're going to become like, I call him a Bushite. He's like kind of related to Bush and things like that, right? And so all the models of stuff down there, like privatizing prisons and, he's taking $6 billion out of healthcare, putting it into making prisons and things like that, right?
You see a lot of people be like pissed off at the government because like they're not ahead of the situation. I feel like the government's acting like really reactive in a lot of ways versus like being proactive.
But they only look at it when it's like it becomes so evident and it becomes almost embarrassing.
Throughout the editing process, I was struck by how little our narrators put blame on anyone. As we pushed our narrators for a better understanding of how they maintain their optimistic approaches to such a serious public health crisis, we heard some valuable perspectives on how to continue doing this work long term without burning out. They also shared some ways that all of us can help, including destigmatizing people who use drugs and advocating for the legalization of all drugs in Canada.
There's so much negative. Like, we could sit here and talk about all the negative stories, like all the overdoses you didn't save, and all of the police interactions that were awful. But I think that there is enough of that. Like, I'm not sure that we need even more of that. I think we need to dig for the good instead of dig for the positive in the movement that's happening as well. Because otherwise it's too sad and we're going to stop getting out of bed, and when we stop showing up, then really nothing's going to change.
There is a community building and there is community, and I think there is community support. I've seen community workshops. I think that there's like more, there's like a shift. I know like the police officers are like carrying around naloxone kits, and There's been a lot more training on that. Like I've been trained on it, and a lot of that training is like complementary. And I know that there's a lot more like resources for people in the community, like community centers, that like they're having more access to these things and like being more prepared of how to react to it. So it's like when we look at these like community vibes, I think that sometimes like there's tons of pieces that we're missing together. We're missing because there's not a clear picture. And I think like that's probably why you're doing this work, is like you can try and fill in some of these gaps, like what it's like, because you have the people who are the drug users, you have like government creating these like regulations and social policies, and social policies are often a lot of like ways of like how society moves, whether that's forward or backwards, depends. But like what about everyone in between? And I think that's probably like why you're doing like this interview right now, is to try and like fill in some of these gaps, because we don't talk to these frontline workers, and like we don't talk to outreach workers, and mental health practitioners aren't high-paid jobs. They're not always desirable, and when you are working like mental health, like working with addictions is often an uphill battle because you don't always have the same resources.
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is VANDU. I think that they put it so well. It's nothing about us without us. Like, that's probably the best thing I've ever heard. Like, yeah, you're right, exactly. It's not this elusive community, that's the community, so let's make sure, you know, they're not just at the table, but they're hosting the damn thing. We're the ones being invited. And just like, remember that.
Yeah, start with the younger kids, like teach them in schools about harm reduction and stuff like that. I'm sure, you know, you see the kids here, every kid in school up in grade 2, 3, 4, they know what needles are, I bet, because they're in their schools, they're in their parks.
And I know that like on the larger scale, because fentanyl is starting to like move more out towards the east, that like people from the east are like looking at some like our big news sources, like say like Global News or some of our local ones. Like I have cousins from Ontario, and they're like, oh, we've heard about your fentanyl crisis. We heard about like fentanyl, because like you have these like big like headlines that are saying it's this like terrifying thing, and like I know my cousins are kind of in Ontario, they're kind of talking about like it's this like black plague that's coming, and it's kind of unpreventable.
I would say educate your people. You know, like, we weren't educated before fentanyl came here. We just like, I see it as it just happened. Overdoses were happening. We started testing the drugs, figuring out it's fentanyl, figuring out it's carfentanil, and then you just get addicted to it. You know, people, I feel like the more you educate them and saying the effects may help, but with a powerful drug like that, I feel like the only way that you can better is to educate your people before the crisis hits. You know, I don't know if it would have helped us, but I feel like we would have a more understanding upon it and how to deal with it.
The community is phenomenal, and where there is trouble, there will always be organizers. And follow the organizers. You know, they're leading from their hearts. They are the community. Why wouldn't you follow somebody like that?
This project would not be possible if it wasn't for the generous support from Professor William Keogh and the organizations VANDU and First United Church. All the names of the narrators have been changed. We would like to thank the people we are calling Brian, Zoe, Richard, Ben, Matthew, and Rachel. This project was created as a term project for History 451 and GSW 830 at Simon Fraser University. The music in this CD-mentary is royalty-free from Bensound. We hope that this CD-mentary will lead you to continue the conversation around the overdose crisis and get involved in any capacity you are able.